The opening clash at Arracourt, September 19, 1944. 7:45 hours. Hill 265, near Arracourt, Lorraine. A blanket of morning mist lay heavy over the French countryside. From the ridgeline, 12 German Panther tanks of the 113th Panzer Brigade crept into firing positions. Each Panther mounted the deadly 75mm KWK-42L/70 gun, a weapon capable of destroying an American Sherman from over 2,000 meters away. Below them, 5 Shermans of the U.S. 37th Tank Battalion moved steadily across open fields, seemingly oblivious to the ambush awaiting them. On paper, the battle was already decided. Panther's advantage, 80mm of sloped frontal armor, effectively 140mm, impervious to the Sherman's 75mm gun except at suicidal ranges. Sherman's weakness, barely 50mm of frontal armor, easily penetrated by the Panther at virtually any distance. The Germans expected an execution, not a fight. Yet by noon, 8 of those 12 Panthers were smoking wrecks. The Shermans, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, advanced unscathed. By the end of the day, the fields around Arracourt would be littered with 49 destroyed German tanks, while American losses remained minimal. Over the next 10 days, until September 29th, the U.S. 4th Armored Division would destroy or cripple nearly 200 German armored vehicles while losing just 48 of their own, a kill ratio that defied every principle of German armor doctrine. What unfolded at Arracourt was not just a tactical defeat. It shattered the Wehrmacht's final illusion that superior technology and engineering could overcome what they dismissed as American mediocrity, mass production, and sheer numbers. The Germans weren't fighting just tanks. They were facing an integrated system of warfare, artillery, armor, air power, logistics, and intelligence working in unison. The counteroffensive and doctrines collide. Early September 1944. Lorraine. Hitler's rage at the American breakout from Normandy hardened into orders. Strike back, crush Patton's fast-moving spearheads, restore German prestige. From this impulse came a hurried counterblow. New Panzer brigades formed from scattered cadres, rushed crews, and the last serviceable tanks the West could scrape together. The German plan. 2 fresh formations, the 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades, and elements of the veteran 11th Panzer Division were committed against Patton's exposed flank near Arracourt. On paper, the numbers looked promising. Panthers and Panzer IVs enough to punch through scattered American screens, seize key hills, and roll the Shermans back on their supply lines. 113th Panzer Brigade, 45 Panthers, and 45 Panzer IVs, commanded to drive fast and hit harder than their training really allowed. 111th Panzer Brigade, similar strength, intended to exploit any breakthrough. 11th Panzer Division, the seasoned reserve, muscle, and credibility for an otherwise improvised effort. Fuel was short, training shorter, but confidence in the Panther remained high. The machine the Germans trusted. The Panther, PZKPFWV, embodied German engineering ideals. Gun, 75mm KWK-42L/70, high muzzle velocity, superb penetration at range. Frontal armor, 80mm sloped to an effective 140mm, frontally immune to the Sherman's standard 75mm at normal combat distances. Doctrine fit, excels in set-piece, long-range tank duels where first-round hits decide the action. In the gunnery schools, crews had drilled the geometry of ambush and the arithmetic of armor. See first, hit first, kill first. The battlefield, they believed, would obey those tables. The system the Americans brought. Across the line, the U.S. Army prepared to fight a different kind of war. Where the Germans sought decisive tank-versus-tank exchanges, the Americans built an integrated weapon system. Tanks, artillery, tank destroyers, infantry, engineers, air support, and logistics stitched together by radios and standard procedures. Key voices shaped that system. Colonel Bruce C. Clark, armor thinker and practitioner doctrine that prioritized speed, coordination, and combined arms over spec sheet superiority. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, 37th Tank Battalion, a commander who treated the Sherman not as a dueling champion, but as a maneuver tool, part of a larger orchestra. From Fort Knox down to company level, American units rehearsed the choreography. Rapid target acquisition, firing on the move, smoke to blind, artillery to suppress, flanking to kill. They knew the Sherman's 75mm wouldn't punch the Panther's nose, so they trained to hit its sides and rear, fast. Intelligence tips the scales. The Germans moved thinking the ground ahead held only scattered Americans. It did not. Ultra intercepts flagged German concentrations days in advance. Artillery air observers, light aircraft, shadowed columns through morning haze. Armored cavalry screens radioed grid after grid into battalion and division nets. American headquarters built a near real-time picture. The Germans advanced blind, the Americans were waiting. Communications, voice over steel. Every U.S. Sherman carried reliable FM radios linking platoons to company, battalion, artillery, and even air support. Standard maps, standard grids, common fire request formats, friction sanded down by procedure. German sets were fewer, shorter-ranged, and easily cut when command tanks were knocked out. When the Panther companies lost their leaders, orders stopped traveling. Initiative, already constrained by habit, often froze with them. Reliability versus perfection. Two industrial philosophies rolled onto the same muddy fields. Panther, brilliant gun, strong front, complex running gear, overstressed final drives, magnificent when everything worked, fragile when it didn't. Sherman, simpler, standardized, easy to keep running, engines and transmissions swapped in hours, parts interchangeable across the theater. Under Arracourt's conditions, rain, mud, cold nights, availability mattered as much as armor. The Americans designed for fight today, fight tomorrow. The Germans had designed for win the perfect duel today. Air power waiting in the wings. Weather would decide when the sky joined the fight. When the mist lifted, the 19th Tactical Air Command sent P-47 Thunderbolts and armed liaison planes prowling overhead. With forward air controllers riding in tanks and sharing maps and grids, air strikes could be vectored in minutes, another layer in the American web. The shape of the coming battle. The Germans sought the classic ambush, Panthers on high ground, Shermans in the open, kill shots at 1,200 to 2,000 meters. The Americans intended to ruin that geometry. Spot the ambush early, cavalry, observers, intercepts. Smother it with artillery, time-on-target missions to stun, blind, and break tracks. Screen with smoke and dust. Swarm from multiple angles, closing to the 400 to 800 M band where the Sherman's guns and fast hydraulic turret traverse, full rotation in 15 seconds, turned inside the Panther's slower response. Finish with tank destroyers and air as needed. The stage was set. The Panthers believed the numbers. The Americans intended to rewrite them. The mist lifts. September 19, 1944. 8 o'clock hours. Near Arracourt. The fog lay heavy over Lorraine's ridges, muffling engines and muting the clatter of steel tracks. To the German tankers of the 113th Panzer Brigade, it was perfect, concealment for their advance. 15 Panthers moved forward in textbook formation, crews confident in the firepower at their command. They never saw what was waiting. The American trap springs. For nearly half an hour, forward artillery observers, hidden in treelines and circling above in spotter planes, had tracked the Panthers' movement. The moment they crossed pre-registered grid squares, the order went out. Within seconds, 12 American artillery battalions, 144 guns, opened fire in unison. The Americans had perfected the time-on-target mission. Shells fired from multiple batteries at different distances arrived at the target simultaneously, saturating the kill zone. In the first minute, 3 Panthers were destroyed, not by tanks but by artillery. The survivors staggered forward, tracks damaged, optics shattered, crews rattled by concussions they'd never experienced in Eastern Front duels. The Panthers pressed on, still believing the Shermans would eventually come into their sights. Hill 265, the ambush reversed. By mid-morning, the lead Panthers reached Hill 265, overlooking open fields near Arracourt. At last, they spotted 5 American Shermans advancing cautiously across the valley floor, Abrams' 37th Tank Battalion. The Germans settled in. Range, 1,200 meters. Perfect killing distance. The first Panther fired. The round sailed wide. In the seconds it took to reload, the Shermans fired, not at the Panthers, but into the ground in front of them. Explosions of dirt and smoke billowed up, blinding German sights. Then, as if rehearsed, the Shermans scattered into multiple directions. Almost instantly, the American observers relayed the Panthers' exact coordinates. White phosphorus and high-explosive shells rained in. The burning smoke clung to optics, obscured vision blocks, and scorched crews. German tanks built for precision at long range were now blind, disoriented, and under bombardment. The Sherman strikes. Through the smoke came the Shermans, not from a front, but from 3 angles at once. Using folds of terrain the Germans hadn't reconnoitered, they had maneuvered unseen into striking distance. At ranges of 400 to 600 meters, the balance shifted. The Sherman's 75mm guns, ineffective against the Panthers' fronts, could slice through 40mm of side armor. And they did, fast. The Sherman's hydraulic turret traverse spun 360 degrees in 15 seconds, compared to the Panther's manual system that took a full minute. American loaders, drilled to muscle shells in under 4 seconds, fired multiple rounds before German gunners could answer. The Panthers, outmaneuvered and outpaced, began to fall. A platoon's triumph. One of the best recorded duels occurred near Leezy. Captain William A. Dwight's Sherman platoon rounded a wood and came face to face with 3 Panthers at 600 yards. Sergeant Donald Decker, Dwight's gunner, fired first. 3 armor-piercing rounds punched into the lead Panther's flank before it could traverse its gun. The second Panther tried to back away. Decker's round smashed through its rear. The third managed one shot, high and wide, before American fire turned it into a burning wreck. That day, Decker destroyed 4 Panthers in rapid succession. His after-action report described it simply: "We got the first shots off, and that was all that mattered." From precision to instinct, the clash revealed the doctrinal divide. German crews fought by procedure. Commander identifies, range estimated, gunner adjusts, loader selects fire. American crews fought by instinct, trained to shoot fast, move faster, and rely on combined arms support. At Arracourt ranges, 500 to 800 meters, speed mattered more than perfection. By late morning, Hill 265 was littered with shattered Panthers. The ambushers had become the ambushed. Abrams Shermans pressed forward and scathed. The counterattack in the mist. September 20th, 1944. Lorraine. At dawn, the fog rolled thick across the rolling farmland near Arracourt. The Germans saw it as a gift from the gods of war. Under that pale gray curtain, the 113th and 111th Panzer brigades massed for a decisive blow, 40 Panthers, with infantry clinging to their flanks. Their commander, Oberst von Seckendorf, led from the front, a habit steeped in German tradition, but one that exposed him to mortal risk. The plan was simple: strike hard through the mist, seize American positions before the Shermans could maneuver, and finally prove the Panthers' superiority. The first shock. At 6:30 hours, German armor emerged from the fog like steel phantoms. Their guns flashed, catching some American outposts off guard. Several Sherman crews scrambled to start their engines as high-velocity shells tore through hedgerows and barns. For a fleeting moment, it seemed the Germans had regained the upper hand. But the Americans were not blind. Every Sherman platoon, every artillery battery, every tank destroyer section was tied together by reliable FM radios. Reports flowed instantly. Within minutes of the first contact, higher headquarters knew exactly where the Panthers were pushing. The counterattack had begun, but it had also been anticipated. The web tightens. As soon as German silhouettes were spotted, artillery observers called in grid references. The fire direction centers did their deadly math. Batteries adjusted. Seconds later, thunder fell. American guns didn't fire in scattered ripples. They struck in overwhelming, simultaneous waves. Shells blanketed the Panthers' assembly areas, tore through accompanying infantry, and broke up formations before they could fully deploy. At the same time, Shermans maneuvered into hold-down positions, exposing only turrets over ridgelines. Tank destroyers from the 704th TD Battalion lurked at the edges of the battlefield, waiting to exploit flanks. The sky clears. By mid-morning, the fog began to thin. That was when the Americans unleashed one of their most decisive weapons, the 19th Tactical Air Command. Waves of P-47 Thunderbolts roared in low, carrying rockets and 500-pound bombs. Forward air controllers, riding in Shermans and Jeeps, vectored the fighter bombers directly onto German armor. Colored panels laid on tank decks identified friendly positions, ensuring coordination between ground and sky. For the Germans, it was a nightmare. Panthers caught in the open were bracketed by rockets. Others that stopped to fire were blasted by artillery. Infantry scattered into ditches, only to be strafed by .50 caliber machine guns. Even the smallest aircraft became a threat. Major Charles Bazooka Charlie Carpenter, flying a flimsy L for Grasshopper liaison plane armed with 6 bazookas lashed to its wings, swooped down on German tanks. His attacks were less destructive than terrifying. Carpenter himself later quipped, "Word must be getting around to watch out for cubs with bazookas. Today they saw me coming and began to dodge." It's hard to hit a tank doing 60 across a field. But terror was part of the victory. Panthers built to duel at 2,000 meters could not fight enemies coming from above or behind. Command in crisis. As the American counter-response mounted, tragedy struck the Germans. Oberst von Seckendorf, fighting from the front in his command Panther, was killed when American artillery scored a direct hit. His death gutted the brigade's leadership. German subordinate officers, trained more to follow than to improvise, faltered. Coordination unraveled. Where the Americans operated through flexible command and instant communication, the Germans stumbled into hesitation. By nightfall, what had begun as a bold thrust had devolved into a bloody retreat. Burned-out Panthers dotted the fields. Infantry stragglers limped back through the mist. The German counterattack had been smashed, not by superior tanks, but by system of warfare, radios, artillery, air power, and flexible leadership binding the Americans into a single, lethal organism. Breaking the back of the Panzer brigades. September 21, 1944. Lorraine. For 2 days the battlefield around Arracourt had echoed with the clash of steel and the thunder of artillery. The Germans, battered yet unbroken, prepared another blow. This time, both the 113th and 111th Panzer Brigades committed together, an effort to regain momentum before the Americans consolidated their grip. But the tide of war was already against them. September 21st, the death of von Seckendorf. The morning began as before, with Panthers and Panzer IVs emerging under cover of mist. Their advance was methodical, seeking the high ground near WWII. At first they gained ground, catching several American outposts off balance. But within minutes, U.S. radio nets carried the alarm across the sector. Artillery observers relayed target grids. The 4th Armored Division's artillery, reinforced by corps-level assets, massed its fire. Shells rained down with frightening accuracy. In the midst of the barrage, the 113th Panzer Brigade's commander, Oberst Hans-Heinrich von Seckendorf, was struck. His command Panther took a direct hit, killing him instantly. His death was catastrophic for German morale. Trained to obey orders rather than act independently, his subordinate officers hesitated. Momentum drained away as confusion spread. The German thrust dissolved into scattered skirmishes, easy prey for American counterfire. September 22nd, a second blow to German command. The next day, the Germans tried again. This time, it was the 111th Panzer Brigade under General Major Heinrich Gunther von Braunert that pressed forward. But American defenses were primed, artillery zeroed, and skies beginning to clear. During the engagement, Braunert too was killed in action, another senior leader lost in less than 48 hours. For the Panzer Brigades, it was the death knell. Leadership evaporated at the exact moment when initiative was most needed. Units that might have regrouped under bold commanders instead faltered, paralyzed by uncertainty. The American contrast. Where German leadership faltered, the Americans thrived on flexibility. Company B, 37th Tank Battalion, September 22nd, WWII. Captain James Leach's radio was knocked out by a near miss. In German practice, the unit might have stalled. But Leach's platoon leaders continued the plan without hesitation, attacking from multiple directions. In the fight that followed, 7 Shermans destroyed 17 German tanks, losing only one of their own. Leach later received the Distinguished Service Cross. This difference in doctrine, rigid hierarchy versus delegated initiative, proved decisive. The Germans lost commanders and cohesion. The Americans lost commanders but kept fighting, their subordinates empowered to carry the mission. September 21st to 23rd, the skies take over. As the mist burned away, the full weight of American air superiority fell on the battlefield. The 19th Tactical Air Command under Major General Elwood P. Quesada unleashed continuous waves of P-47 Thunderbolts. Forward air controllers riding in Sherman's directed strikes with precision, using shared maps and grid references. German accounts spoke of terror. Tanks halted in daylight, risked immediate rocket or bomb attack. Their 16mm top armor, never designed for plunging fire, couldn't withstand 500-pound bombs or 5-inch rockets. Even near misses bent gun barrels jammed turrets or concussed crews. By the 23rd, German tankers moved only at night or in thick fog. Daylight belonged to the Americans. The collapse of German initiative. With both brigade commanders dead, formations mauled by artillery and air power, and radios frequently cut, the Panzer brigades were adrift. German veterans would later describe these days as a blur of sudden bombardments, smoke and fire, with no clear orders and no hope of reinforcement. In contrast, the Americans seemed everywhere. Artillery rounds falling on every assembly area, tank destroyers striking from the flanks, and thunderbolts circling overhead. What the Germans had envisioned as a decisive counteroffensive was dissolving into piecemeal losses. The turning of the tide. September 24th to 26th, 1944. Lorraine. By the fourth week of September, the German counteroffensive around Arracourt was coming apart. The Panthers had shown their claws, but each day the Americans bled them of strength. What began as confident thrusts had become desperate lunges. Now the battlefield itself, the mud, the skies, and the supply lines, turned decisively against the Wehrmacht. September 24th, Captain Spencer's masterstroke. Near Juvillies, the Germans massed nearly 30 tanks for an attack across open farmland. Facing them was Company C, 37th Tank Battalion, under Captain Robert Spencer, with just 7 operational Shermans. Rather than meet force with force, Spencer executed a tactical trap. Defilade, he positioned his Shermans in hull-down positions behind a low ridge, showing only turrets. Disruption fire. As the Germans advanced, the Shermans opened fire not to destroy, but to break their formation. Shots aimed at tracks, dust, and smoke. Artillery screen. Spencer called for smoke rounds to blind the German gunners. The flank. 3 Shermans slipped unseen through a shallow valley. Emerging on the German flank at point-blank range, they destroyed 8 Panthers in 3 minutes. The German formation collapsed in confusion. Final tally: 17 German tanks destroyed, 8 damaged. American losses: 1 Sherman damaged, quickly repaired. The Panther's mechanical curse. By late September, the Panther was betraying its crews. The Lorraine mud and autumn rains turned its complex interleaved road wheels into liabilities. Mud clogged between wheels, freezing overnight, sometimes immobilizing tanks without a single shot fired. Even when running, Panthers broke down at alarming rates. Final drives. Overstressed by the tank's 45-ton weight, they failed frequently under maneuver. Transmissions. Designed for lighter prototypes, they seized under strain. Maintenance. Complex, requiring specialized tools and parts that were increasingly unavailable. At Arracourt, more Panthers were disabled by breakdowns than by enemy fire. German mechanics, short on spares and working under artillery harassment, could not keep pace. The Sherman's reliability. In stark contrast, the Sherman's mechanical simplicity proved its greatest strength. Track tension adjustment, minutes, not hours. Engine swap, 4 hours. Transmission replacement, 6 hours. Standardized parts, interchangeable across thousands of Shermans. The 37th Tank Battalion's maintenance platoon kept over 90% of Shermans operational throughout the battle. German readiness rates often fell below 50%. As Master Sergeant John Fulner recalled, "We had assembly line maintenance down to a science. If something broke, we could fix it or replace it within a day. This meant that a Sherman knocked out on Monday could be back in action by Wednesday. A Panther crippled on Monday might sit abandoned for weeks, if it could be recovered at all." September 26th, artillery unleashed. The Germans made one last concerted push on the 26th. But by then, the American artillery system was running at peak efficiency. The 4th Armored Division's guns, reinforced by Corps and Army assets, could mass 150-plus guns on a single target in minutes. That day alone, they fired over 15,000 rounds in support of Arracourt operations. The system worked like clockwork. Forward observers gave simple grid references over secure radios. Fire direction centers used pre-calculated firing data and mechanical computers to translate calls into commands within seconds. Time on target ensured shells from different batteries struck simultaneously, maximizing shock. German tankers, veterans of the Eastern Front, were stunned. They were accustomed to artillery that was scarce, scattered, and poorly coordinated. At Arracourt, every movement seemed instantly punished by steel rain. Captured documents described German morale crumbling under this bombardment. Assembly areas were shelled before attacks could launch. Convoys dispersed in panic. Even halted tanks became easy targets, bracketed by whistling barrages. The balance shifts. By the evening of the 26th, the reality was inescapable. The German counteroffensive had burned through its strength. Panthers lay abandoned in ditches, their turrets locked by shrapnel, their tracks broken in the mud. Crews who once trusted their tank's superiority now fought with dread, never sure if they faced a Sherman, a Hellcat, a P-47, or a wall of artillery fire. The Americans, by contrast, grew stronger each day, not by fielding better tanks, but by keeping their tanks fighting, their supply lines running, and their combined arms synchronized. The final German assault. September 27th to 29th, 1944. Lorraine. The Battle of Arracourt had raged for over a week. The fields were scarred with shell holes, hedgerows smoldered, and the wrecks of Panthers and Shermans alike rusted where they had burned. For the Germans, the counteroffensive was slipping away, but Hitler demanded results. A final effort would be made, and one of Germany's best field commanders arrived to oversee it. September 27th, the Hellcats strike. The Americans had not only Shermans. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with the M18 Hellcat, had quietly joined the fight. The Hellcat was everything the Panther was not, lightly armored, fast, almost fragile. But with its 76mm gun and astonishing 55 miles per hour top speed, the fastest tracked vehicle of the war, it was a weapon of maneuver, not attrition. That morning, Lieutenant Edwin Leeper's platoon lay hidden in a tree line as a column of German armor passed. Leeper waited until the last tanks rolled by, then gave the order. The Hellcats opened fire from the rear, where German armor was weakest. In just 12 minutes, they destroyed 5 Panthers and 3 Panzer IVs. Before German gunners could traverse, the Hellcats relocated at top speed, disappearing into the landscape. Not a single M18 was lost. The ambush rattled German nerves. From then on, every advance had to consider the Hellcats prowling like wolves on the flanks. September 28th, Manschufel arrives. General Otto von Manschufel, one of Germany's most capable panzer leaders, arrived to salvage the offensive. His reputation was formidable, tactically flexible, sharp, and aggressive. If anyone could steady the faltering brigades, it was him. But Manschufel had inherited ruins. The 113th Panzer Brigade was shattered, its commander killed. The 111th Panzer Brigade was badly mauled. Even the veteran 11th Panzer Division had been reduced to a shadow of its former strength. Fuel was scarce, ammunition scarcer, and morale cracked under constant bombardment. Still, Manschufel planned one last assault. September 29th, the last throw. At 0600 hours, the final German attack began. Roughly 30 Panthers and infantry from 11th Panzer Division pushed forward under Manschufel's direct command. Unlike the earlier chaotic thrusts, this assault showed professional skill, good use of terrain, close coordination between tanks and infantry, disciplined movement. But the Americans were ready. Colonel Bruce C. Clark, commanding Combat Command A, had anticipated the attack. Through ultra-intercepts and constant reconnaissance, the Americans knew the Germans were coming. Positions were prepared, artillery concentrations pre-planned, tank destroyers hidden in ambush. The result was slaughter. Artillery cut German infantry away from their armor. Tank destroyers and Shermans flanked the Panthers as they funneled into kill zones. P-47 Thunderbolts, arriving as the fog lifted, pounded the battlefield with bombs and rockets. By noon, the assault had collapsed. 22 German tanks lay destroyed or abandoned, the rest retreating toward the border. The reckoning. When the guns finally fell silent on September 29th, the outcome was decisive. German losses. From 262 starting armor vehicles, only 62 remained operational, a loss rate of 76%. The 113th Panzer Brigade ceased to exist as a fighting unit. The 111th was similarly wrecked. Even the seasoned 11th Panzer Division was reduced to regiment strength. American losses, 48 tanks over the course of September, with many repaired and returned to action. Crew casualties were comparatively light thanks to better escape hatches and internal layouts. The final kill ratio, 3.6 to 1 in favor of the Americans, contradicted every expectation of German doctrine. The Panther, designed to dominate duels, had been beaten not by superior tanks, but by superior systems, logistics, radios, artillery, air power, and flexible command. Aftermath and lessons. September 30th, 1944. Lorraine. The guns around Arracourt finally fell silent. The fields were littered with the wrecks of burned-out Panthers, Shermans, and Panzer IVs, the air still heavy with the smell of scorched metal and cordite. Villages that had endured years of occupation now bore the scars of liberation, walls shattered by artillery, homes collapsed under tank fire, families displaced by battles fought in their backyards. But behind the smoke and ruin, something larger had taken shape. The Battle of Arracourt was more than just a clash of tanks. It was a crucible where two military philosophies collided, and the outcome would echo far beyond Lorraine. The myth of technical superiority. On paper, the Germans should have won. The Panther was superior to the Sherman in nearly every specification. Thicker armor, a longer-ranged gun, better optics. German doctrine emphasized tank duels at long range, where these advantages would decide battles. But Arracourt proved the limits of this philosophy. Tanks do not fight in isolation, they fight as part of a system. The Panther was a superb tank, but it was just a tank. The Sherman was part of an integrated web of capabilities. Artillery, accurate, overwhelming, and always available. Air power, P-47s and even light liaison planes turned the skies into American territory. Logistics, fuel, ammunition, and spare parts kept Shermans running at 90% strength, while German units struggled to keep half their Panthers moving. Command flexibility. When American officers fell, subordinates adapted. When German officers fell, subordinates froze. In the end, systematic superiority crushed technical superiority. The reliability factor. The U.S. Ballistic Research Laboratory later confirmed what crews had seen firsthand. In 30 documented engagements, Shermans achieved a 3.6 to 1 kill ratio against Panthers. Not because the Sherman was better in a duel, but because it was always there to fight, day after day. A Sherman could be repaired and returned to action in hours. A Panther often sat immobilized for days, or was abandoned entirely. Availability proved more decisive than raw firepower. Training and doctrine. American tank crews were the product of a standardized training system at Fort Knox. They drilled endlessly in gunnery, driving, combined arms tactics, and rapid loading. Every crewman could perform any position in the tank. Losses were tragic, but not paralyzing. Others stepped in seamlessly. German crews in late 1944 were another story. Fuel and ammunition shortages had limited training. Many new crews had less than 100 hours of tank experience compared to American crews with over 1,000. The Panther demanded expert handling, the Sherman demanded competence, and the Americans had competence in abundance. The logistics of victory. The Red Ball Express, running thousands of trucks a day from Normandy, ensured that Patton's army never starved of fuel or shells. Sherman units received steady resupply of ammunition in all types, armor-piercing, high-explosive, smoke, and white phosphorus, allowing them to engage tanks, infantry, and fortifications alike. German brigades at Arracourt often sat still, waiting for fuel that never arrived. Panthers guzzled 2.5 gallons of fuel per mile cross-country, a consumption rate unsustainable under Allied bombing and overstretched supply lines. Ammunition stocks were equally thin. Many Panthers carried only armor-piercing rounds, limiting their ability to fight infantry or artillery. Arracourt was a battle not just of steel, but of gasoline and supply depots. Human cost and courage. For all the analysis of doctrine and machines, Arracourt remained a brutal human ordeal. American crews knew that if a Panther's shell penetrated their Sherman, fire could engulf the tank in seconds. The Sherman's nickname, Ronson, lights every time, was grimly accurate. German crews faced white phosphorus shells, artillery barges, and rocket-firing planes. In many cases, they abandoned their tanks not because they were destroyed, but because they were blinded, immobilized, or psychologically broken. French civilians endured yet another trial of fire. Villages like Arracourt, Juvilliers, and Lizy were caught in the crossfire, their liberation paid for with shattered homes and civilian casualties. Despite the horror, acts of humanity emerged. American medics treated German wounded alongside their own. Civilians risked their lives to shelter soldiers. Tank crews on both sides pulled comrades, even enemies, from burning vehicles. Strategic meaning. Arracourt was not a battle for a capital or a river crossing. It was a battle for credibility. For Germany, the defeat destroyed the illusion that their technical superiority could still shape the war. The loss of hundreds of irreplaceable tanks and crews crippled their ability to resist the Allied advance. For the Americans, it was validation. Their doctrine, their production system, their logistics, and their combined arms philosophy had been tested and proven superior. Within 8 months, Nazi Germany would surrender. The legacy. The lessons of Arracourt shaped the future. U.S. doctrine emphasized integration, flexibility, and logistics over raw specifications. The M1 Abrams tank, named after Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, embodied these principles: reliability, crew survivability, and integration into a larger system. NATO's strategy during the Cold War drew directly on Arracourt, defeating technically superior Soviet tanks not with one-on-one duels, but with artillery, air power, and maneuver. German survivors later admitted the truth. They had not been defeated by mediocre Shermans. They had been defeated by a system of warfare they could not match. Arracourt became more than a battle. It became a lesson. In modern war, no single weapon guarantees victory. Only the system wins. The human dimension. Though the Battle of Arracourt is often remembered for ratios, doctrines, and the clash of tanks, it was above all a human ordeal. Behind every Sherman and Panther were crews of young men, often barely in their 20s, living hour by hour with the knowledge that their next engagement might be their last. Civilians caught in the middle endured yet another wave of devastation in a land already scarred by years of occupation. The American tankers. For U.S. crews, the Sherman was both a tool and a gamble. They knew its vulnerabilities. A Panther's 75mm gun could turn their tank into a fireball with a single hit. The chilling nickname, Ronson, lights every time, was never far from their minds. Yet crews trusted in their training, their teamwork, and their system of support. Escape drills were rehearsed endlessly. Many lived because they could bail out in seconds. Maintenance miracles gave them confidence that their tank would run when needed. Medical support, with forward surgical hospitals and plasma within the golden hour, meant wounds were not automatically death sentences. A private in Abrams' 37th Tank Battalion later recalled, "We weren't braver than the Germans. We just knew if we got hit, someone would patch us up, and if the tank broke, somebody would fix it. That kept us pushing." The German tankers. For Panther crews, the battlefield was a different nightmare. Their tanks were superior on paper, but often crippled by mud, breakdowns, and a sense of being hunted. Artillery barges crashed down with uncanny accuracy, making every movement feel exposed. Air attacks from P-47s or even a single grasshopper with bazookas stripped away their sense of safety. Fuel shortages forced tanks to sit idle, making them targets before they ever fired a shot. Captured German prisoners spoke of disbelief. The Americans had more shells in one day than we saw in a month on the Eastern Front. Every time we moved, artillery fell. Every time we stopped, airplanes came. Many confessed shock at the professionalism of American soldiers, disciplined, well-fed, and seemingly inexhaustible. The medics. The 4th Armored Division's medical units operated under constant strain. Tank casualties were among the most horrific: burns, concussions, traumatic amputations. Yet survival rates were far higher than in previous wars, thanks to American doctrine. Forward surgical hospitals were placed close to the line. Plasma, morphine, and sulfa drugs were available at company level. Rapid evacuation, sometimes even by experimental helicopter, saved men who once would have been written off. One medic described it simply: "If we got them within an hour, most lived." That was the difference between our war and theirs. The civilians of Lorraine. The people of Lorraine endured the battle with a mix of fear, loss, and relief. Villages like Arracourt, Juvillies, and Lezy changed hands more than once, their homes reduced to rubble by tank and artillery fire. Civilians huddled in cellars as shells exploded above. When American units finally held the ground, many French villagers welcomed them despite the destruction. The mayor of Arracourt later told reporters, "The noise was incredible. The shells, the tanks, the airplanes, it seemed endless. But when the smoke cleared and the German tanks were burning, we knew we were free." French resistance fighters also played their part, guiding American patrols through backroads, pointing out German supply dumps, and reporting troop movements. Their knowledge of terrain proved invaluable. Acts of humanity. Despite the savagery, moments of compassion surfaced. American medics treated German wounded alongside their own. Civilians pulled dazed tankers, sometimes enemy tankers, from burning wrecks. Tank crews risked their lives to rescue comrades from vehicles engulfed in fire. These glimpses of shared humanity punctuated the brutality, reminders that even in mechanized war, courage and mercy endured. The psychological toll. Arracourt taught crews that survival often depended on seconds and instinct. For many, the experience left lasting scars. The sound of incoming shells triggered panic long after the war. Burn victims carried not just physical scars, but memories of comrades trapped in infernos. German survivors often spoke of feeling hunted, powerless against a system of war they could not match. And yet, the same veterans, American and German alike, also spoke of mutual respect for the courage of their adversaries. The legacy of the human struggle. The Battle of Arracourt was not just about doctrines or machines. It was about people. Tankers who fought knowing their lives hung by seconds. Medics who turned ditches into operating rooms. Civilians who endured liberation through fire and ruin. Their stories remind us that behind every statistic and ratio lies human endurance, suffering, and resolve. Strategic echoes. The guns had fallen silent in Lorraine, but the echoes of Arracourt carried far beyond the smoldering wrecks. For the U.S. Army, the battle became a case study in modern warfare. For the Germans, it was a bitter reminder that engineering brilliance could not overcome systemic weakness. And for historians, it became one of the most analyzed armored engagements of the Second World War. The lessons for the U.S. Army. Arracourt validated an entire approach to war developed between the world wars: combined arms, standardized training, and logistics first. The after-action reports compiled by the U.S. Armored Force Board at Fort Knox emphasized several lessons that shaped American doctrine for decades. Integration over isolation. Victory came not from tank versus tank duels, but from the systematic use of artillery, infantry, air power, and logistics in concert. Tanks were only one piece of the orchestra. Reliability over perfection. A Sherman that fought every day was more valuable than a Panther that broke down half the time. Availability multiplied combat power. Flexibility of command. American units functioned even when leaders fell. Doctrine empowered subordinates to carry on. In contrast, German rigidity collapsed when commanders were killed. Logistics as strategy. Fuel, ammunition, and spare parts decided operations as surely as guns and armor. The Red Ball Express, though improvised, proved more decisive than any single tank design. The German reckoning. Post-war German generals and historians dissected Arracourt with ruthless honesty. General Otto von Manschufel admitted, "We fought tanks. The Americans fought with a system." The Bundesarchiv studies in the 1950s concluded that German armor doctrine had failed at every level. Strategically, committing the last reserves to Lorraine while the Eastern Front collapsed was folly. Operationally, rushing brigades into combat with poor training and no logistics doomed them before contact. Tactically, reliance on long-range tank duels ignored terrain, weather, and enemy doctrine. The Panthers' technical excellence became irrelevant in a battle fought on American terms. Influence on the Cold War. Arracourt directly shaped U.S. and NATO thinking for the next generation. The core lesson, that technologically superior tanks could be defeated by integrated, flexible systems, became central to Western defense plans against the Soviet Union. Tank design. The M-26 Pershing and later the M-48 and M-60 emphasized reliability and crew survivability. Doctrine. Air-ground integration, rapid artillery response, and mobile defense became standard. The Abrams legacy. Decades later, the M1 Abrams was named for Creighton Abrams, who had embodied the Arracourt philosophy: speed, aggression, and combined arms. The historians debate. Arracourt became required reading at U.S. staff colleges, but it also sparked myths and arguments. 5 Shermans beat dozens of Panthers became a shorthand, though in reality victory came from artillery, air support, and maneuver, not miraculous duels. The Sherman's reputation shifted. Once dismissed as undergunned and lightly armored, historians later recognized its real strength: reliability, mobility, and integration. German accounts, often colored by post-war memoirs, sometimes framed the defeat as a failure of Hitler's interference or bad luck with weather. But the archives revealed deeper systemic flaws. Today, most military historians view Arracourt as a watershed moment, the clearest demonstration that modern armored warfare is not about individual machines, but about the system as a whole. Popular memory. In films, games, and popular books, Arracourt is often simplified to the drama of Panthers versus Shermans, a duel between the sleek predator and the underdog. While such portrayals capture the drama, they miss the deeper truth. It wasn't 5 Shermans that won Arracourt. It was artillerymen, radio operators, truck drivers, mechanics, medics, pilots, resistance fighters, and tank crews working as one. The battlefield itself told the story. Burned-out Panthers abandoned not from heroism or cowardice, but from a simple reality. Systematic warfare beat technical superiority. The legacy of Arracourt. The Battle of Arracourt was not the largest clash of tanks in World War II, nor the bloodiest. But in its fields of mud and smoke, a truth was revealed that outlived the war itself. It was not the thickness of armor or the length of a gun barrel that determined victory. It was the system that supported the men inside those machines. The triumph of industrial democracy. At Arracourt, German crews believed they faced mediocrity, a mass-produced tank inferior to their Panthers in every technical category. What they discovered was something far more dangerous. A Sherman was never just a tank. It was artillery on call, air power overhead, maintenance crews ready with parts, and fuel trucks rumbling forward in convoys. American mediocrity meant interchangeability, reliability, and numbers that kept the system running at full strength. German superiority meant isolated excellence that collapsed when cut off from fuel, spares, and command. The battle was a living demonstration that industrial democracy could wage war systematically, turning quantity and coordination into decisive quality. Shaping future doctrine. Arracourt became a touchstone in military education. At Fort Knox, the U.S. Command and General Staff College, and later NATO war colleges, the battle was dissected as proof that combined arms beats isolated arms. Tanks are only lethal when supported by artillery, infantry, and air power. Reliability beats brilliance. The best tank is the one that can fight every day. Flexibility beats rigidity. Empowered subordinates outperform hierarchical dependence. Logistics is strategy. Wars are won when fuel, ammunition, and spare parts arrive faster than the enemy can consume them. These principles flowed directly into Cold War doctrine, into the design of the M48, M60, and ultimately the M1 Abrams, which carried Creighton Abrams' name, and his philosophy of aggressive, integrated armored warfare. The human echo. Arracourt's legacy also lies in its people. Veterans remember the battle not as an abstraction of kill ratios, but as a crucible of terror, courage, and endurance. American tankers carried scars from fire and steel, but also the quiet pride of knowing they had outmaneuvered a superior machine. German survivors spoke of helplessness, of being hunted by artillery and aircraft, of tanks abandoned for lack of fuel, of realizing the old ways of war no longer worked. Civilians of Lorraine remembered liberation through fire. Homes destroyed, lives uprooted, but freedom finally wrested from occupation. For all its strategic significance, Arracourt was above all a human ordeal, lived minute by minute in the mud of eastern France. The enduring lesson. In the decades since 1944, wars have changed in technology, but not in principle. From the Fulda-Gap exercises of the Cold War to modern conflicts, the lesson of Arracourt remains clear. Victory belongs not to the most advanced weapon, but to the best integrated system. No single tank, plane, or gun wins alone. It is the orchestration of all elements, technology, training, logistics, leadership, that multiplies combat power. Arracourt was where this truth was laid bare. Closing reflection. On those misty September mornings, German tankers believed they were predators stalking prey. By the end of the month, the fields of Lorraine were strewn with their wrecks, testimony to a different kind of warfare. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams and his 37th Tank Battalion had shown that courage, speed, and combined arms could overturn even the fiercest technical odds. The Shermans that seemed like easy victims had behind them an arsenal, a doctrine, and a nation in arms. In the wreckage of Arracourt, the future of armored warfare was visible. Technical superiority had met systematic superiority, and systematic superiority had won.